The desert wind carried the smell of dust and diesel fuel across the ridge. Kira Dalton lay motionless on the rocky outcrop, her body pressed against stone that still held the cold of the Afghan night. Through the scope of her rifle, she could see everything. The village below, the narrow paths between mud brick walls, the SEAL team moving like shadows through the pre-dawn darkness, and the red dot. It appeared without warning. A pinpoint of crimson light dancing across Commander Garrett Lockhart's chest as he paused at the corner of a compound wall. He froze, not because he panicked, but because he understood what that dot meant. Somewhere in the rocks across the valley, another sniper had found him first. Kira's finger rested against the trigger guard. Not on the trigger, not yet. Her breath came slow and measured the way her father had taught her 26 years ago in the forests of Montana. In, out, in. Hold. The radio crackled in her ear, Lockhart's voice quiet and steady despite the laser sight painting his heart. Overwatch, this is Viper 6. I have acquired a red dot. Repeat, I have acquired a hostile laser designation. Her voice came out flat, emotionless. The voice of someone who had learned to bury fear so deep it couldn't interfere with the mathematics of death. Copy Viper 6. I have visual on hostile shooter. Range is 1517 yards. Crosswind 9 knots, gusting to 11. Uphill angle 35 degrees. A pause, then Lockhart again. Can you make the shot? Through the scope, she could see the enemy's sniper. A woman. Professional stance. Quality equipment. And taped to the wooden stock of her rifle, barely visible in the growing light of photograph. Too far to make out details. But Kira knew what it was. Someone waiting at home. Whisper, I need an answer. Can you make the shot? The red dot hadn't moved, hadn't wavered. One squeeze from that woman and Lockhart would drop. His blood would darken the Afghan sand. His children would grow up without a father. Kira's own finger moved to the trigger. Affirmative, she said. I can make the shot. Then do it. You are cleared hot. But before she could end this, before the bullet left the barrel and crossed that impossible distance, there was something that needed to be understood. The story of how she got here. To this ridge. To this moment. To this choice between two lives and all the lives that depended on both. 26 years ago, the story began in a place very different from this desert. It began in the mountains of western Montana, where the winters came early and stayed late, and where a girl learned that every shot carried a price that never stopped being paid. The Montana forest in January was a cathedral of silence. Snow muffled every sound. Even the wind seemed to whisper rather than howl through the pine branches. Kira Dalton, 16 years old and small for her age, moved through the trees with the careful quiet her father had drilled into her since she could walk. Wade Dalton walked 20 yards ahead. 54 years old, lean as a wolf, his face weathered by wind and time and things he never talked about. Vietnam had put lines around his eyes. The years after had deepened them. But his hands stayed steady, always steady. He stopped and raised his fist. Kira froze mid-step, her balance perfect, breathing controlled. Ahead, partially hidden by a thicket of frozen brush, a bull elk grazed on exposed bark. 800 yards out, maybe more. Wade looked back at her and pointed 2 fingers at his eyes. Then at the elk, then at her rifle. Your shot, your decision. Kira raised the Remington 700, her father's rifle. Old even then, but cared for with the kind of attention most people reserve for newborn children. She settled into her stance. Found the elk in the scope, calculated wind from the way snow crystals drifted off the pine branches. 800 yards, uphill, light crosswind from the northwest. She adjusted the scope. 3 clicks elevation. 1 click windage. Her finger found the trigger. Smooth, gentle, not a pull, a squeeze. The rifle spoke once, sharp and final in the winter quiet. The elk dropped where it stood. Clean, instant, no suffering. Wade didn't smile. He never smiled after a kill, but he nodded once. That single nod meant more than any words. They walked to where the animal lay. Wade knelt beside it, placed his hand on its flank. He spoke quietly the way he always did after a successful hunt. One shot, Kira. That's all you ever get that matters. You don't shoot to prove you can. You don't shoot for sport. You shoot because it's necessary. Because your family needs food. Because this animal's death has purpose. He looked up at her. His eyes were gray like winter sky. You understand the difference? Yes, sir. Do you really? Kira looked at the elk, at the clean wound, at the way it had fallen without knowing death was coming. A single bullet, as she said, one truth, it ends what needs ending. Wade stood, put his hand on her shoulder. That's right, and you carry it. Every shot, every life. You carry what it means. Some people never learn that. They think shooting is just mechanics, mathematics. But it's more. It's choice. And choice has consequences. He was quiet for a moment. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow. Your mother and I won't be around forever, Kira. Someday you'll need to make these choices alone. When that happens, remember this. The burden doesn't get lighter. You just get stronger at carrying it. 3 days later, Wade and Sarah Dalton took the truck into town. Medical supplies, Wade said. Your mother's not feeling well. We'll be back by dark. Kira stayed at the cabin. She had homework. Math problems from the correspondence course her mother homeschooled her with. She sat at the kitchen table, working through equations, listening to the old radio her father kept tuned to the emergency band. Habit, he called it. Always listen. Always know what's happening. At 6:47 p.m., the radio crackled to life. All units. Vehicle accident on Route 200-mile marker 73. Head-on collision, logging truck and civilian pickup. Request immediate ambulance and fire response. Kira looked up from her homework. Route 200, that was the road to town. Mile marker 73, that was near the turnoff. The radio continued. Dispatch asking for details. Response units confirming. Then a voice, a state trooper. His words careful, controlled. The way people talk when they're looking at something terrible. Dispatch, be advised. We have 2 fatalities in the civilian vehicle. Male and female. Pickup truck totaled. No survivors. Kira stood. The chair scraped against the wooden floor. Her hands went cold. Can you identify the vehicle? A pause, the longest pause Kira had ever heard. Green Ford F-150. Montana plates. Registration shows Wade Dalton. Address listed as rural route outside Kalispell. The pencil fell from Kira's hand. It hit the floor, but she didn't hear it. She didn't hear anything except the blood rushing in her ears and the trooper's voice continuing with protocols and procedures and things that didn't matter because her parents were dead. She walked outside without putting on a coat. The January cold hit her, but she didn't feel it. She walked to the shed where her father kept the truck, where he should have kept the truck. But it was empty, just oil stains on the concrete and the smell of old gasoline. Kira stood there for a long time, minutes, maybe hours. The snow fell on her shoulders and melted and soaked through her shirt, but she didn't move. Because 3 days ago, her mother had asked if she needed anything from town. And Kira had said no. But that was a lie. She had been coughing, a deep chest cough that kept her up at night. She needed medicine. But she didn't want to bother them, didn't want to make them drive to town in the ice and cold just for cough syrup. So she said no. And her mother, who knew her daughter better than Kira knew herself, had heard the cough anyway, had decided to go to town anyway, to get medicine anyway. They died for cough syrup. They died because Kira couldn't ask for help. They died because she was trying to be tough, independent, not a burden. They died because of her. That knowledge hit Kira Dalton at 16 years old, standing in an empty shed in the Montana winter. And unlike the burden her father talked about, this one didn't make her stronger. It made her disappear. The authorities came 3 days after the funeral, social workers with kind eyes and gentle voices asking about next of kin, about guardians, about where Kira would go now that she was alone. Kira sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd heard the radio announcement, and said nothing. The social worker, a woman named Patricia with graying hair and a worn briefcase, tried again. Kira, honey, we need to make arrangements. Is there family, aunts, uncles? Anyone who could take you in? No. Friends of your parents? No. We have some good foster homes, people who care. You'd have your own room. You could finish school. Go to college if you wanted. Kira looked at the woman, really looked at her, saw the earnest concern, the genuine desire to help, and knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't stay here, couldn't let anyone else try to care for her. Because people who cared about Kira Dalton ended up dead. That night, after Patricia left with promises to return in the morning, Kira packed. Not much. Clothes, her father's rifle, the notebook where he'd written down everything he knew about long-range shooting, ballistic charts, wind-reading techniques, formulas for calculating bullet drop and Coriolis effect, a legacy written in pencil and coffee stains. She left a note on the table, just 3 words, I'll be fine. Then she walked into the forest and vanished. For 6 years, Kira Dalton lived in the spaces between civilization and wilderness, not homeless, not lost, just absent. She moved through the Montana backcountry, then south through Wyoming, drifting through Colorado and finally into New Mexico. Never staying anywhere long enough to be noticed, never getting close enough to anyone to matter. She survived the way her father taught her. Hunting, fishing, trapping, reading the land, understanding weather. Every skill he'd passed down became her lifeline. Every lesson became armor against the world. But survival wasn't living. It was just existing. In those 6 years, she took odd jobs, cash under the table, no questions asked, ranch work, equipment maintenance, anything that required skill but not conversation. She slept in her truck when she had one, in the forest when she didn't, and she practiced every day. Her father's rifle, his notebook, learning the physics of distance and wind, teaching herself what he'd started, becoming something he'd never intended, a ghost who could shoot. At 22, she needed money, not much, just enough for supplies, ammunition, salt, things you couldn't take from the forest. She heard about the competition from a rancher she did odd jobs for outside of Albuquerque. Cash under the table, no questions asked. He mentioned it casually, filling his truck with ghosts at a roadside station. You hear about that shooting thing down in Arizona? Some kind of underground competition? Big money for anyone who can hit targets at 1,000 yards. Held next month on tribal land. Kira had been cleaning his horse stalls. She stopped, leaned on the pitchfork. How big? 50,000, winner takes all. They say it's illegal. A lot of ex-military types. Bragging rights in betting pools. The rancher drove off. Kira went back to the stalls. But the idea stuck. $50,000. Enough to live on for years. Enough to keep moving. Enough to stay invisible. She used what little money she'd saved to buy a bus ticket to Phoenix, then hitchhiked the rest of the way to the coordinates she'd found on a handwritten flyer at a gun shop. The proprietor had looked at her twice. Young, female, alone. But he'd given her the information after she'd field stripped with a rifle in under 30 seconds blindfolded. You know what you're walking into? Yes, sir. These aren't Boy Scouts. They're serious shooters. And they don't like losing to anyone, especially not to Poem. To a girl. The shop owner's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I was going to say to strangers, but yeah, that too. Kira picked up her rifle case. Her father's rifle inside, the only thing she owned that mattered. I'm not going there to make friends. The Arizona desert in late summer was a different kind of brutal than Montana winter. Heat that turned the air to liquid, sun that bleached color from everything, and somewhere in the emptiness north of the Navajo reservation, hidden in a canyon that didn't exist on any map, 200 men with rifles and too much pride gathered to prove who could shoot the farthest. Kira arrived at dawn. The entry fee was $500 cash. She pulled crumpled bills from her jacket pocket and handed them to a man built like a concrete barrier. He counted it twice. Looked at her. Name, nobody. We need a name for the roster. That is my name. Nobody. He shrugged, wrote it down, handed her a number. 47. You're in the third group. Starts at noon. Don't be late. She wasn't late. She was early. Watching, learning. The first two groups shot well. Ex-military, most of them. Marines, Army Rangers. A few older men who moved with the careful economy of people who'd done this when it actually mattered. When missing meant someone died. They hit their targets, collected their applause, took their scores. Then it was Kira's turn. She walked to the firing line, set down her case, opened it. The rifle inside looked ancient compared to the modern tactical equipment everyone else carried. No scope upgrades, no bipods, just worn wood and blued steel and the faint marks where her father's hands had gripped it for 30 years. Someone laughed, not loudly, just enough to carry. What is that, a museum piece? Kira didn't respond. She assembled the rifle with movements so practiced they looked like muscle memory made visible. Checked the action, loaded, then lay prone and looked downrange. The range marshal, a thick-necked man with sunglasses and a clipboard, read the specifications. Target distance, 1,000 yards. Wind variable, 4 to 6 knots from the southwest. Time limit, 3 minutes. 3 shots. Best 2 count. He raised the flag, dropped it. Kira didn't rush. She watched the heat shimmer, watched the way dust moved across the desert floor, felt the wind on her face and adjusted the scope. 2 clicks. 3 clicks. Back 1. Her breathing slowed. The chaos of the crowd, the heat, the pressure, all of it faded until there was only the scope and the target in the space between. First shot, the rifle bucked. Downrange dust puffed near the target. Hit. Center mass. Second shot. Same process, same calm. Hit. Dead center. The crowd went quiet. Third shot. Kira adjusted half a click. Fired. The target rang like a bell. Perfect. 3 for 3. Center grouping tight enough to cover with a quarter. She stood, safed the rifle. started packing it away. The range marshal stared at his spotting scope, then at her, then back at the scope like it might be lying. Ma'am, that's a perfect score, at 1,000 yards, with what looks like a stock Remington from the 70s. Yes, sir. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? Kira closed the case, latched it, stood. Montana, from a man who's dead. She walked away. Behind her, the crowd erupted, not in applause, in argument, in disbelief. In sudden activity as people repositioned themselves to see this, nobody shoot the next round. But she kept walking, out of the canyon, into the desert, disappearing the way she always did. Except this time someone followed. His name was Thorne Maxwell, 52 years old, gray hair cut military short, suit that looked wrong in the desert heat, but he wore it anyway. He caught up to Kira 3 miles from the competition where she'd stopped to rest under the shadow of a rock formation. That was impressive back there. Kira didn't look up. She was cleaning her rifle, the ritual calming her more than conversation ever could. You left before the finals. You would have won. Didn't come to win. Then why come at all? To see if I still could. Maxwell sat down, not too close, respectful of distance. He pulled a canteen from his jacket and took a drink. Offered it to Kira. She shook her head. My name is Thorne Maxwell. I was at the competition watching. Actually, I've been watching you for about 6 years now. That got her attention. Kira's hand moved closer to the rifle. Not threatening, just prepared. Maxwell raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. I'm not here to hurt you, Kira. I'm here because I made a promise to your father. She stopped cleaning, looked at him fully for the first time. His face was familiar in a way she couldn't place. Something in the eyes, the set of the jaw. You didn't know my father. I did. Wade Dalton, Staff Sergeant, Marine Corps Scout Sniper. We served together in Quezon, 1968. Maxwell reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. Old, faded, creased from being carried for decades. He handed it to Kira. 2 young men in jungle fatigues. One of them, unmistakably her father. Younger, harder. The face of someone who'd seen things that changed him. The other man was Maxwell, barely recognizable without the gray hair and the lines. But the eyes were the same. He saved my life, Maxwell said quietly. More than once. And when we got back stateside, when he went north to Montana and I went east to Virginia, we made a deal. If anything happened to either of us, the other would watch out for family. Kira handed the photo back. Her grip trembled slightly, but she controlled it. Then you're late. They died 6 years ago. I know, I was at the funeral, stood in the back. You didn't see me, nobody did. And when you disappeared into the forest, I tracked you. Not close, just keeping watch, making sure you were alive, making sure you survived. Why not approach me then? Maxwell put the photo away carefully, like it mattered. Because you needed to disappear. I understood that. Your father did the same thing after Vietnam. Went into the woods for nearly a year. Came out different, quieter, ready to live again. I figured you'd do the same. He looked at her, really looked. But 6 years is long enough. You can't stay in the woods forever, Kira. Eventually, you have to decide what you're going to do with what your father taught you. He taught me to survive. He taught you to shoot. That's different. Maxwell stood, brushed dust off his suit pants, pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and set it on the rock beside Kira. There's information in there, photographs, names, locations, people who hurt others because they can, because nobody stops them. Your father spent 20 years trying to forget what he could do with a rifle, but he never forgot why it mattered, why someone needed to be able to make the hard shots. He started walking back toward the heat shimmer of the distant highway. You don't have to open that folder, Kira. You can go back to the woods. Keep hiding. Keep surviving. That's a choice. It's valid, but it's not the only choice. He stopped, turned back. Your father's last words to me before he moved to Montana were these: if I have a kid, teach them that shooting isn't about killing. It's about protecting what matters. You matter, Kira, and so do the people in that folder who need protecting. Then he was gone, walking into the shimmer, disappearing. Kira sat for a long time, the folder beside her, unopened. The sun moved across the sky, shadows shifted, and finally when the heat became unbearable, she reached for the folder. Inside were photographs, Taliban commanders, Al-Qaeda operatives, names she didn't recognize but could guess the significance of. And beneath the photographs, casualty reports. American soldiers killed because intel came too late, because a shot wasn't taken, because someone who could have stopped it wasn't there. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note. One shot, one life saved. Your father understood that. The question is, do you? Kira closed the folder, stood, looked at the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, not forgiveness, but purpose. Maybe hiding wasn't honoring her parents. Maybe it was just another way of letting guilt win. She picked up her rifle case, the folder, and started walking. Not back to Montana, not deeper into the wilderness, toward the highway, toward Maxwell's car waiting in the distance, toward a choice that would define the next 20 years of her life. 3 days later, she stood at a private airstrip outside Reno. Maxwell waited by a small jet. No insignia, no markings, just anonymous money and government clearance. Any questions? He asked. Kira looked at the plane, at the rifle case in her hand, at the future she couldn't see but could feel pulling at her. Just one, she said. When do I start saving people? Maxwell smiled, not happily, but with understanding. Now, he said, you start now. The plane lifted into the Nevada sky. Below, the desert spread out like a sea of emptiness. And somewhere in that emptiness, Kira Dalton left behind the girl who disappeared into the woods. What emerged was something else entirely. Not a soldier, not a spy, a ghost with a rifle and a debt to pay. To her father, to herself, to all the people waiting in the world who needed someone to make the impossible shot. They would call her Whisper, but that name would come later. First, she had to earn it. First, she had to learn that saving lives sometimes meant taking them, and that the burden her father warned about wasn't just philosophy, it was prophecy. The helicopter descended through pre-dawn darkness toward a place that didn't exist on any map. Camp Sentinel. Tucked into the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, hidden by forest and federal airspace restrictions, and the kind of secrecy that came with congressional oversight committees that never wrote anything down. Kira watched through the window as trees gave way to a cleared landing zone. Concrete bunkers, fortified structures built into the hillside, range facilities that stretched for miles into restricted territory. This wasn't where soldiers learned to shoot. This was where the best shooters in America came to discover they still had things to learn. 2 years had passed since the Arizona desert. 2 years of contract work, small jobs, quiet eliminations. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made headlines. Just the kind of work that kept bad people from doing worse things. And one job that haunted her still. Mogadishu. 8 months ago, a warlord's compound. Kira on Overwatch. Everything going according to plan until a boy walked into her crosshairs. 16 years old, AK-47 in his hands. Not by choice. Conscripted at gunpoint 3 days prior. She'd hesitated, 3 seconds, long enough to see his face, to understand he was a victim too. Then he'd raised the rifle toward the extraction team, and she'd pulled the trigger. Clean shot, center mass. He'd dropped instantly. The team had escaped, but his face stayed with her. Showed up in dreams, in reflections, in every quiet moment when her guard was down. Maxwell said it was normal. Said every shooter carried their kills. Said it got easier to function even if it never stopped hurting. He didn't say it would follow her to Camp Sentinel. But it did. The pilot didn't speak to her, hadn't spoken during the entire flight from Nevada. He landed, kept the rotor spinning, and gestured toward the open door. Kira grabbed her rifle case and pack, stepped out into rotor wash and mountain cold. Maxwell stood 50 yards away next to a man in full tactical gear. Navy insignia. SEAL trident on his chest. Even in the darkness, Kira could see the way he carried himself. Command. Experience. The kind of certainty that came from leading men through doors where death waited on the other side. The helicopter lifted behind her. Gone before she'd taken 10 steps toward the 2 men. Maxwell made brief introductions. Commander Garrett Lockhart. This is the asset I mentioned. Lockhart looked at Kira, taking in the civilian clothes, the worn rifle case. The complete absence of military bearing. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Calculation, assessment. No rank, Lockhart said, not a question. No, sir. No military service. No, sir. But Maxwell says you can shoot. Kira met his gaze. Steady, not challenging, just honest. I can shoot. Lockhart turned to Maxwell. His voice dropped, but Kira heard it anyway. She looks 25. This is who you're sending to train with SEALs. She's 42, Maxwell said quietly, and she's better than anyone you have on this base. You'll see. I don't need to see. I need to know my men are getting real training, not babysitting some contractor's pet project. Maxwell's face hardened slightly. The first crack in his professional demeanor Kira had seen in 2 years of working with him. Commander, with respect, you requested additional sniper support for the Afghanistan rotation. I'm providing it. Whether she wears a uniform or not doesn't change what she can do. Give her 3 days. If she can't keep up, I'll pull her myself. Lockhart looked at Kira again, this time longer, searching for something, weakness maybe, or arrogance. He found neither. 3 days, he said, but she follows the same standards as everyone else. No special treatment, no civilian considerations. She fails a qual, she's gone. Understood. Lockhart walked away. Maxwell watched him go, then turned to Kira. He's right to be skeptical. Most contractors are political appointments, people with connections but no real capability. You're going to have to prove yourself. I know. It won't be easy. It never is. Maxwell handed her a folder. Thin, mostly blank pages with a few key details. Your bunk is in Building 7. Range qualifications start at 0600. Don't be late. He started to walk away, then stopped. Looked back. Kira, these men are the best at what they do. They've earned their place here through blood and sacrifice. Respect that. I will. And they'll respect you, eventually. Once you show them, you've earned it too. Then he was gone. Kira stood alone in the darkness of a training facility that had broken better shooters than her. She picked up her rifle case and walked toward Building 7. 3 days to prove she belonged. 3 days to show that a girl from Montana who learned to shoot from a dead father could stand alongside the most elite warriors America produced. 3 days to earn respect. She'd spent 26 years learning, didn't come from asking for it. It came from delivering when it mattered most. The sun rose over Camp Sentinel like a slow fire. Kira stood at the 1,000-yard range with 23 other shooters. All men, all military. Most of them SEAL snipers rotating through advanced training before their next deployment. The rangemaster, a granite-faced chief petty officer named Anders, walked the line with a clipboard and zero patience for anything except perfection. This is a qualification course, not a competition. You're not here to beat each other. You're here to prove you can perform under conditions that simulate actual combat. Wind, heat, stress, limited time, equipment failure. He stopped in front of Kira. Looked down at her rifle case. What are you shooting? Remington 700, Chief. Military issue? No, Chief. Personal weapon. Anders' eyebrow raised slightly. Personal weapons were allowed but uncommon. Most shooters preferred the standardized equipment. Consistency across platforms. Interchangeable parts. It's rated for this range. Yes, Chief. We'll see. The first drill was simple. Engage 10 targets at varying distances, 800 to 1,200 yards. Wind shifting. 10 minutes to complete. Minimum score 8 hits. Kira watched as the first 5 shooters ran the course. All hit their minimums. 2 perfect scores. Clean, professional. The kind of shooting that came from thousands of rounds downrange and muscle memory earned through repetition. When her turn came, she didn't rush. Assembled her rifle with the same careful movements her father had taught her. Checked the action. Loaded, settled into position. The wind was tricky. Coming from the northwest but swirling through the valley in unpredictable eddies. She watched the flags, the way grass moved at different distances, felt it on her face. First target, 900 yards. She adjusted for wind, for elevation. Fired, hit. Second target, 1,050 yards, different angle. She compensated, fired, hit. By the 6th target, she'd found a rhythm, not mechanical, instinctive, reading the environment like text, understanding the physics without thinking about them. 10 shots, 10 hits, not perfect placement, but solid, effective. She safed the rifle, stood, walked off the line. Behind her, silence. Then Anders' voice. Acceptable. Next shooter. That was all. No praise, no criticism, just acknowledgement that she'd met the standard. In the SEAL world, that was respect enough. The afternoon brought hand-to-hand combat drills. Kira was smaller than every man there. Lighter, less reach, less raw strength. In a straight fight, she'd lose badly. But her father had taught her other lessons too. Use momentum against them. Don't fight strength with strength. Survive first. Win second. She held her own, got thrown more than she threw, but she got up every time. Didn't quit, didn't complain. By evening, muscles she'd forgotten about were screaming. Her hands had fresh bruises from impact drills. But she was still standing. The mess hall was quiet when she entered. Most of the team had already eaten. She grabbed a tray, loaded it with food she wasn't sure she could taste, and found a corner table. She was halfway through her meal when someone sat across from her. Russell Brennan, the SEAL who'd scored perfectly on the morning quals. 38 years old, built like a long-distance runner, with the careful eyes of someone who'd spent years looking through scopes at people who wanted him dead. "You shot well this morning," he said. Kira nodded. "Kept eating. That Remington, it's old." "Yes." "Custom modifications? No, stock. Just maintained." Brennan considered this. Took a drink of his coffee. "You prior service, different branch maybe?" "No." "Contract work then?" Kira set down her fork. Looked at him directly. "Yes, 2 years, small jobs." "You ever shoot anyone, actually pull the trigger knowing a person would die?" The question hung between them, direct, no judgment, just professional curiosity. Kira thought about Mogadishu, about the 16-year-old boy, about how his face showed up every time she closed her eyes. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I have." "Did it bother you?" "Oh, very much." Brennan didn't flinch, didn't offer condolences, just nodded once, understanding that some things didn't need elaboration. "We have a drill tomorrow. Blind shooter. Ever done one?" "No. They give you coordinates, no visual, no time to range find. You have to calculate everything from map data and take the shot based on trust. Trust in your math, trust in your equipment, trust in yourself." He stood, picked up his tray. "Most people miss their first time. It's not about accuracy. It's about confidence under uncertainty. Just so you know what's coming." Then he walked away. Not hostile, not friendly, just professional. One shooter to another. Kira finished her meal alone, thinking about the drill, about blind shots and trust, and all the ways you could fail when you couldn't see what you were shooting at. The next morning proved Brennan right. The blind shooter drill took place in a different section of the range. Massive, complex, targets hidden in terrain features at unknown distances. Each shooter received a sealed envelope with coordinates, wind data, and terrain elevation. 10 minutes to study. One shot to prove you understood. Kira watched 3 shooters before her. 2 missed it completely, 1 hit close enough to count. When Anders called her name, she stepped to the line, opened the envelope, read the data. Target coordinates 38.7421 north 79.8392 west. Current position 38.7331 north 79.8298 west. Elevation difference 340 feet. Wind variable 4 to 7 knots from southwest. She had 10 minutes to convert coordinates to distance. Factor in elevation. Calculate bullet drop. Estimate wind at a target she couldn't see. The math was complex. Her father had taught her most of it. The rest she'd learned through trial and error across 8 years of shooting. But this was different. This wasn't hunting elk where a miss meant trying again tomorrow. This was simulation of combat where a miss meant someone died. She worked through the calculations. Distance came out to approximately 1,000 yards. Uphill. Wind would be less at elevation, but terrain might create funnels. She adjusted her scope, checked her work, adjusted again. But something felt wrong. The wind data didn't match what she was seeing in the flags. The elevation seemed off. She recalculated. Same result. The number said one thing. Her instinct said another. 5 minutes left. Kira made a choice. Trust the math or trust the gut. Her father had always said numbers don't lie, but terrain does. When in doubt, split the difference. She adjusted to a middle point. Not quite what the math said, not quite what her instinct screamed, a compromise. A hedge? A mistake. The 10 minutes felt like seconds. Anders called time. Kira settled into position, aimed at empty space where her calculations said a target existed. Let out half a breath, squeezed. The rifle spoke. Downrange, nothing visible happened. No indication of hit or miss. Just silence. Anders looked through his spotting scope. His face didn't change. After a long moment, he lowered the scope and made a note on his clipboard. Miss. 4 feet left, 2 feet low. Next shooter. Kira stood. The first real failure since she'd arrived. Not close, not acceptable. She'd miscalculated badly. As she walked off the line, she saw Brennan watching. He gave the slightest nod, not sympathy, just acknowledgement. You missed. It happens. Learn from it. But it wasn't just a miss. It was a failure of trust. She'd split the difference instead of committing. Had hedged instead of deciding. In combat, that kind of hesitation killed people. The next shooter stepped up. Young SEAL named Castellano, 28 years old, confident. He opened his envelope, studied it for 8 minutes, made his calculations, set his scope, fired. Anders checked the spotting scope. Hit center mass. Castellano had trusted his math completely, hadn't hedged, hadn't compromised, and he'd succeeded where Kira had failed. That night, Kira stayed at the range after everyone else had left, ran the calculations again, found her error. She'd accounted for air density at sea level instead of adjusting for mountain elevation, and she'd second-guessed herself on wind. The data had been correct. Her instinct had been wrong. By splitting the difference, she'd guaranteed failure. The lesson cut deep. Trust wasn't about feeling confident. It was about committing to a choice and accepting the consequences. In Mogadishu, she'd hesitated 3 seconds before shooting the boy. Those 3 seconds had nearly cost the extraction team. She'd pulled the trigger eventually, but the hesitation had been there. The doubt, the unwillingness to commit. This miss was the same thing, same flaw, same failure. She wouldn't make it again. But the miss haunted her anyway, because in her mind that 4-foot error wasn't just a target. It was someone relying on her, someone who'd die because her math was wrong, because she didn't trust herself. The toll of that knowledge settled on her shoulders, getting heavier. By the end of week 1, Kira had established herself as competent, not the best shooter on the base, but solidly in the top tier. Reliable, professional, quiet. Lockhart watched her during drills but didn't speak to her directly. That changed on day 8. He found her at the rifle maintenance station after evening qualifications. She was breaking down her Remington with practiced efficiency. The movements meditative. "You've kept up," Lockhart said without preamble. "Yes, sir." "Better than I expected." Kira didn't respond, kept working. "We're rotating to Afghanistan in 2 weeks. Forward operating base near the Pakistan border. High-value target operations. Maxwell suggested you could provide additional overwatch." "I could." "This isn't training, Dalton. This is real. People shoot back. They don't miss on purpose." "I understand." Lockhart was quiet for a moment, watching her hands move across the rifle components. Steady, sure. "Have you killed anyone in combat not in self-defense, but on mission? Pulled the trigger knowing it was your job to end someone?" Kira's hands stopped. She looked up at him. Her eyes held something he couldn't quite read. Not fear, not hesitation, something older, sadder. "Yes, sir, I have." "When?" "8 months ago, Somalia. Different contract." "Tell me." So she did, about the warlord's compound, about the 16-year-old boy, about the 3 seconds of hesitation, about pulling the trigger anyway because the team needed her to, about how his face showed up every night in her dreams. Lockhart listened, didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You hesitated." "Yes, sir." 3 seconds could have cost your team." "I know. But you pulled the trigger anyway." "Because someone had to." Lockhart studied her face, looking for cracks, for weakness, for the kind of doubt that got people killed in combat. He found something else instead. Someone who'd already paid a price, who knew the cow, and who still showed up. "Did it bother you?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir. It bothered me very much." "Good," he said. "Anyone who says it doesn't is lying or broken. You'll do fine, Dalton." He started to leave, then turned back. "And Dalton, out there you don't call me Senator, you call me Lockhart. Or Badge. We're not formal in the field. Rank matters less than capability." "Understood. Get some rest. We ship out in 12 days. 12 days to prepare for war. 12 days to make peace with what was coming. 12 days to carry her father's rifle into a place where every shot would matter and every mistake would cost more than pride." Kira finished her maintenance, reassembled the rifle in the darkness of the armory, ran her fingers across the stock where her father's hands had worn the wood smooth. "One bullet," she whispered. "One truth. Help me make it count." The rifle had no answers, only history, only the memory of all the lives it had taken and all the lives it might still save. Afghanistan hit like a physical force. The heat, the dust, the smell of diesel and human waste and fear baked into everything. Forward operating base Nightingale sat at the edge of hostile territory, surrounded by mountains that hid Taliban fighters and foreign mercenaries and all the complications of a war that had been going on longer than some of the soldiers fighting it. Kira arrived with Lockhart's team on a cargo plane that landed in the middle of the night. No lights, no ceremony, just controlled chaos and men moving with the efficiency of people who'd done this too many times. The briefing came 6 hours later in a plywood structure that called itself the Operations Center. Lockhart, Brennan, 8 other SEALs, and Akira, Maxwell was there too, having flown in separately through channels Kira didn't ask about. The target was a Taliban logistics coordinator. Not frontline, not sexy, but critical. He moved weapons, money, intelligence. Taking him would disrupt supply lines for months. The plan was straightforward. SEAL team would infiltrate at night, capture the target. Exfil before dawn, standard snatch and grab except for one problem. Their designated marksman, a quiet operator named Rodriguez, had blown out his knee during a vehicle rollover 3 days prior. He could walk, barely. He couldn't shoot, not accurately. Lockhart looked at Kira. You're up. Overwatch from the North Ridge. Cover our approach and extraction. Rules of engagement, hostile act or hostile intent. Anything threatens the team, you drop it. Copy. This isn't training. Understand? I understand. But she didn't. Not really. Because understanding something intellectually and understanding it when you're looking at a human being through a scope are different things entirely. They inserted at 0200 hours. 2 helicopters, low and fast. The SEAL team dropped at the valley floor. Kira went to the ridge, alone, the way she worked best. She climbed through darkness, found a position among rocks that gave her sight lines on the village and the team's approach route. Settled in, began the wait. Through her scope, she watched the village sleep. A few lights, dogs moving between buildings, the normal rhythms of people who didn't know war was coming for them tonight. The SEAL team moved like whispers. Even knowing where to look, Kira could barely track them. Shadows among shadows. Lockhart led. Brennan covered the rear. Perfect spacing, perfect discipline. Then movement. On a rooftop 300 yards from the team's position, a man, a K-47, slung across his back. Scanning. Not panicked, not aware. Just routine security. Kira's crosshairs found him. Center mass, easy shot, wind minimal, range known. Lockhart's voice quiet in her ear. Whisper, we see him. Can you take him quiet if needed? Affirmative. Stand by. The man on the rooftop kept scanning. His pattern would bring him around to face the team's position in about 30 seconds. When that happened, he'd see them. Raise the alarm. Everything would collapse into chaos. Kira's finger moved to the trigger. The man was young, maybe 20, maybe younger. Hard to tell in the green tint of the night vision scope. 20 seconds. Her breathing slowed. Automatic. The way her body had learned to respond. In, out, in, hold. 15 seconds. The man turned. Started his scan back toward the team. Whisper, take the shot. Her finger tightened. Pressure building. Almost there. And then she saw his face. Really saw it. Young, unshaven, tired. The face of someone doing a job. Maybe not even by choice. Maybe because Taliban recruited from villages by force. Maybe because it was this or watch his family starve. The face of the 16-year-old boy from Mogadishu. Kira froze. Her finger on the trigger but unable to move. Unable to pull. Unable to do the thing she'd come here to do. Whisper, I need that shot. Now. The man's eyes swept past where Lockhart crouched behind a low wall. Kept moving. Didn't register what he'd seen. Not yet. But he'd come back around. He'd look again. He'd see. Whisper. Her grip trembled. The crosshairs wavered. Every instinct screaming at her to pull the trigger. Every memory screaming at her not to. Brennan's voice, urgent but controlled. I don't have the angle. Whisper, it has to be you. The man turned back. This time he stopped. Looking. Seeing. His hand moved toward his radio. Something broke inside Kira. Not courage. Not hesitation. Just the simple truth that if she didn't shoot men, she knew would die. Men who had families. Men who'd chosen this life to protect others. She pulled the trigger. The suppressed rifle made almost no sound. Just a soft cough. Downrange the man dropped. Clean. Instant. Dead before he understood what happened. Lockhart's voice. Relief evident. Target down. Good shot. We're moving. Kira lowered the rifle. Her grip shaking badly now. Adrenaline, passion, guilt. The physical reaction to taking a life. She'd done it before, but it never got easier. Her father had promised it wouldn't. She kept watching. Kept covering. Professional, despite the tremors. The team reached the target compound. Breached. Sounds of controlled violence. Then Lockhart's voice again. Package secured. Moving to exfil. They came back out. One SEAL carrying a hooded figure. The others covering. Moving fast now. Speed over stealth. Kira scanned for threats. Found none, British. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her breathing came too fast. Not controlled anymore. Just gasping. She forced herself to focus. Watch the team clear the village. Watch them reach the landing zone. Watch the helicopters come in low and angry and take them away. Then and only then did she let herself break, turned away from the scope, rolled onto her side and vomited into the Afghan dust. The man she'd killed hadn't been a child, hadn't been innocent. He'd been armed, alert, part of a force that killed Americans and burned schools and threw acid in girls' faces for trying to learn. But he'd also been human, someone's son, maybe someone's father. A person who woke up that morning not knowing it was his last. Kira had ended that. One squeeze, one irrevocable choice. The burden her father warned about. Heavy enough to crush. She cleaned herself up, packed her rifle, started the long walk to the extraction point where a helicopter would collect her separately. The SEAL team would already be back at base. Mission successful. Target captured. No friendly casualties. Because she'd pulled the trigger. 3 seconds too late. But eventually, when she finally made it back to Nightingale, dawn was breaking. Lockhart found her at the helicopter pad, covered in dust, eyes hollow, hands still trembling. He didn't ask if she was okay. He could see she wasn't. You hesitated, he said, not accusatory, just factual. Yes. 3 seconds. Could have cost us everything. I know. Why Twidak? Kira looked at him. This man who'd led teams through doors where death waited, who'd made impossible choices in impossible situations, who'd somehow stayed human through all of it. Because I saw someone I killed before. Different person, different country, but same age, same face, same everything. Lockhart was quiet. Then he sat down on the dusty ground beside where she stood, gestured for her to sit. She did. You know what I see, he said finally. I see someone who feels the cost. Most shooters learn to compartmentalize, put it in a box, lock it away. They have to, otherwise they couldn't function. But you carry it all, every shot, every face. Is that a weakness? It's human, and in this work, humanity is dangerous. It makes you hesitate, second guess. It could get you killed, could get your team killed. He stood, looked down at her with something in his eyes that might have been respect, or pity, or both. But it also makes you careful, precise. You don't shoot unless you have to, and when you do, you make it count. That's worth something. Maybe more than perfect reflexes. He offered his hand, pulled her to her feet. Get some sleep, Dalton. We have another mission in 72 hours, and I need you sharp. Will I be? That's up to you, but I think you will, because people like us don't quit. We just carry more and keep walking anyway. He walked away. Kira stood in the rising sun, covered in dust and shame and the particular exhaustion that comes from pulling a trigger you wished you didn't have to pull. 3 seconds. The difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The difference between a living teammate and a flag-draped coffin. 3 seconds she'd spent frozen between who she was and who she needed to be. She couldn't afford that again. Whatever it cost, whatever toll it added. Next time she'd pull the trigger faster. Even if it meant losing pieces of herself, she'd never get back. 72 hours after the hesitation. 72 hours of Kira dismantling and reassembling her rifle until her fingers bled from the repetition. Running calculations until the numbers blurred. Lying awake in her bunk, staring at plywood ceiling and seeing the face of every person she'd ever killed through a scope. 2 faces now. The boy from Mogadishu, the man from the rooftop, both of them waiting in her dreams. The briefing room was packed. Full SEAL team. Maxwell, intelligence officers with folders marked secret in red ink, and a photograph on the projection screen that made everyone go quiet. Taliban commander Abdul Rashid, high-value target. The kind of man who orchestrated ambushes and IED placements in suicide bombings. Responsible for 47 American deaths in the last 6 months alone. He was careful, paranoid, moved locations constantly, never stayed anywhere long enough to be found. But intelligence had a fix. A compound in the Kunar Valley. 48-hour window. After that, he'd vanish again. Lockhart stood at the front of the room, his voice flat, professional. Standard capture operation. We go in fast. Secure the target. Exfil before local fighters can respond. Timeline is tight. Margin for error is 0. He clicked to the next slide. Another photograph. This one made Kira's breath catch. A woman. Mid-30s. Slavic features. Hard eyes. Professional sniper rifle across her lap. The image quality suggested it had been taken from a distance. Surveillance footage. Natalia Volkov, former Russian Spetsnaz, now freelance. Taliban hired her specifically to protect Rashid. She's killed 3 NATO snipers in the last 2 years. Long-range specialist, prefers elevated positions, extremely patient, extremely deadly. Maxwell added quietly from the back of the room. She doesn't miss. Ever. Lockhart looked at Kira. Our Overwatch needs to locate and neutralize her before we move on the compound. That's you, Dalton. You find her, you stop her. Otherwise, this entire operation fails before it starts. Understood. This isn't like the village. This is sniper versus sniper. Whoever sees the other first wins. Whoever hesitates dies. Kira nodded. Her hands were steady now. The 72 hours of preparation had burned away everything except focus. She'd made her choice. Next time, no freeze. Next time, the shot when it was needed. Whatever the price. They inserted at dusk. The mountains of Kunar province rose like broken teeth against the sky, turning purple and gold. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the violence about to unfold beneath it. The SEAL team went to the valley floor. Kira went up. Always up. High ground was life for a sniper. Control. Perspective. The ability to see what was coming before it arrived. She climbed for 90 minutes. Moving slow. Careful. Every step deliberate. The rock face was unforgiving. One mistake would mean a fall that ended in broken bones or worse. But her father had taught her to climb in Montana forests. Had taught her that fear of falling was just another form of doubt to overcome. She found her position as full darkness settled. A rocky outcropping that gave her sight lines on the compound below and the surrounding ridges where an enemy sniper would likely position. She settled in, arranged stones for minimal profile, camouflaged herself with netting and local vegetation, became part of the landscape. Then she waited. Waiting was the hardest part, the part nobody talked about. Hours of absolute stillness while your body screamed for movement, while your mind conjured scenarios, while doubt crept in through every crack in your discipline. Kira had learned to wait in Montana winters, sitting motionless in deer stands while cold turned her fingers numb. Her father beside her, teaching patience as much as marksmanship. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't the rifle, he'd said once. It's time. You wait. The target doesn't. Eventually they move. Eventually they expose themselves. And when they do, you're ready. She was ready now. Had been ready for 11 hours. The sun had risen, moved across the sky, started its descent toward the western peaks. Below the compound showed minimal activity. A few guards, normal patterns, no indication they knew what was coming. Lockhart's voice in her ear. Quiet. Professional. Whisper, we're in position. Status on hostile overwatch. Kira scanned the ridges again, looking for anything that didn't belong. A glint. A shadow. Movement where there should be stillness. Nothing. Negative contact. Still searching. We need her located before we move. I know. She kept looking. Methodical. Section by section. The way her father taught her to clear a forest. Don't rush. Don't assume. Every rock, every shadow, every possibility. Then she saw it. Not movement, not a glint. Something more subtle. A darkness where the sun should have created light. A shadow that didn't match the terrain features. 600 yards northeast. Elevated position. Perfect sight lines on the compound and the SEAL team's approach route. Kira adjusted her scope. Focused. And there she was. Natalia Volkov. Prone. Perfectly camouflaged. Professional setup. Her rifle was pointed not at the compound, but at the space the SEAL team would have to cross. She was waiting too. Had been waiting just as long. Just as patient. And taped to the stock of her rifle, clearly visible, even at this distance, was a photograph. A little girl, maybe 6 years old. Blonde hair, bright smile. Kira's breath caught. Her grip faltered. The enemy wasn't just a professional. She was a mother. Someone with a child waiting at home. Someone fighting for money to send back to that little girl. Someone who probably told herself the same thing Kira did. That this was necessary. That the cause justified the price. That protecting what mattered meant doing hard things. Whisper report. Kira forced her voice steady. Hostile sniper located, northeast ridge, range 950 yards. Can you take the shot? The question hung in the air. Could she physically? Yes. The range was manageable, the conditions were acceptable. She'd made harder shots. But could she pull the trigger on a mother, on someone who had a child's photograph taped to her rifle the same way Kira kept her father's notebook in her pack? Whisper, I need confirmation. Can you take the shot? Kira watched through the scope as Volkov made minute adjustments to her position. Professional, focused, waiting for the SEAL team to expose themselves so she could kill them, so she could earn her payment, so she could send money home to a little girl in Grozny or Moscow or wherever home was. And Kira understood with perfect clarity that this woman would not hesitate, would not freeze, would pull her trigger the instant she had a target. Because that's what professionals did. That's what mothers fighting for their children did. Affirmative, Kira said quietly. I can take the shot. Then stand by. We're moving in 3 minutes. 3 minutes, 180 seconds. The space between now and irrevocable choice. Kira settled deeper into position, began her calculations. Range 950 yards. Wind shifting 4 to 6 knots from the west. Temperature cooling as the sun descended. Elevation uphill angle complicated the ballistics. Bullet drop would be less than flat ground, but wind would be tricky in the mountain updrafts. She adjusted her scope, compensated for known variables, made educated guesses about the unknown ones. Through the crosshairs, Volkov remained motionless, patient, professional, a mirror of everything Kira had become. 2 minutes. Kira's hand moved to the photograph in her own pack. Her parents, smiling, alive, taken a month before they died. She didn't look at it, just touched it. Reminder of why she was here, why any of this mattered. One shot, one life saved, one life taken. Her father's voice in her memory. You don't shoot to kill Kira. You shoot to end what needs ending. Sometimes that's an animal for food. Sometimes it's a threat to people you're protecting. But you always know why, and you always carry it. 1 minute, Lockhart's voice. Movements in position. Whisper you are cleared hot. Engage at your discretion. Kira's breathing slowed. Automatic. Trained response to stress. In, out, in, hold. Her finger found the trigger. Applied pressure. Not enough. Not yet. Just preparing. She watched Volkov shift slightly, adjusting for the SEAL team's movement below. Any second now, she'd acquire Lockhart in her scope. Any second now, a red dot would appear on his chest. And if Volkov fired first, Lockhart would die. His children would lose their father. The same way Kira had lost hers. The same way Volkov's daughter might lose her mother. Someone's child was losing a parent today. The only question was which child, which family, which future would end. Kira made her choice. She pulled the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Familiar. The recoil she'd felt 10,000 times. But this time was different. This time she watched through the scope as the bullet covered the distance. 0.95 kilometers. Travel time just over 2 seconds. Time enough to see everything, to understand everything, to regret everything, but not time enough to take it back. The bullet struck Volkov's scope. Glass shattered. The impact snapped her head back. She collapsed, motionless, dead before her brain could process what happened. The photograph of her daughter fluttered free, caught the wind, tumbled down the mountainside like a dying bird. Kira lowered her rifle, her hands shaking badly now. Not from the shot, from the toll of it, from knowing what she'd just done, who she'd just killed. Below Lockhart's voice, relief evident. Target down, good shot, we're moving. Good shot, professional terminology for ending a human life, for making a child an orphan, for adding another face to the collection Kira saw when she closed her eyes. She watched the SEAL team breach the compound, watched them secure Rashid without resistance, watched the operation unfold exactly as planned. Success, mission accomplished, no friendly casualties. Because she'd pulled the trigger, because she hadn't frozen this time, because she'd chosen which child lost their parent. The team extracted smoothly, helicopters in and out in under 4 minutes. Rashid hooded and bound, the SEALs untouched. Perfect execution. Kira stayed on the ridge, watching, making sure no one pursued, professional to the end. But inside something was breaking, had been breaking since she pulled the trigger, was shattering completely now that the adrenaline was fading and reality was setting in. She'd killed a mother, someone's daughter, someone who woke up this morning and looked at a photograph of her child and chose to come to this ridge anyway because the money mattered more than the risk, or because she had no other options, or because she was desperate or trapped, or any of 1,000 reasons that made sense to her. And Kira had ended all of that with a single bullet. One decision, one irrevocable moment. When the extraction helicopter came for her 2 hours later, she climbed aboard without speaking. The crew chief tried to congratulate her on the successful mission. She ignored him, sat in the back, stared at nothing. At Nightingale, she went straight to her quarters, locked the door, sat on her bunk with her rifle across her knees, and for the first time since her parents died, Kira Dalton cried. Not quiet tears, full sobs, the kind that came from deep in the chest and brought up everything she'd been holding down for 26 years. She cried for her parents, for the 16-year-old boy in Mogadishu, for the man on the rooftop 3 days ago, for Natalia Volkov and her daughter who would never see her mother again. She cried for herself, for what she'd become, for the burden that just kept getting heavier no matter how strong she got. Maxwell found her 3 hours later. He didn't knock, just opened the door with a key she didn't know he had. Stood in the doorway looking at her with something in his face that might have been understanding. You saved him, Maxwell said quietly. Lockhart, his team, they'd all be dead if you hadn't taken that shot. I know. Volkov was about to fire another 3 seconds and Lockhart would have had a red dot on his chest. You stopped that. I know. Maxwell came inside, closed the door, sat on the chair across from her bunk. You want to know about her, about Volkov? No. I'm going to tell you anyway. He pulled out a folder, intelligence report. Kira didn't want to read it, but Maxwell read it to her anyway. His voice flat, professional, making it just facts. Natalia Volkov, age 34, former Russian military, dishonorable discharge for selling classified information, became freelance contractor, 23 confirmed kills over 8 years. Civilians, aid workers, journalists, anyone who paid enough. She wasn't defending her daughter. She was funding a lifestyle. He closed the folder, set it on the bed beside Kira. That doesn't make you feel better, does it? No. Good it shouldn't, because the truth is, even if she was a monster, she was still a person. Still someone's daughter. And you still ended that. The burden doesn't care about justification. Kira looked at him. This man who'd watched over her for 8 years, who'd recruited her, who'd turned her into this. Does it get easier? No, anyone who says it does is lying or broken. You just learn to function despite it. Learn to carry more than you thought possible. Learn to live with choices you wish you didn't have to make. He stood to leave, stopped at the door. Lockhart wants to see you tomorrow. He's recommending you for commendation. For the shot. I don't want it. I know, but you should go anyway. He needs to say what he needs to say. Respect that. After Maxwell left, Kira sat alone with the intelligence folder. She didn't open it, didn't want to see Volkov's face in more detail, didn't want to know more about the woman she'd killed, but she couldn't escape the photograph. That little girl smiling. Somewhere in Russia right now, a child was waiting for her mother to come home. And she never would, because Kira had made a choice. The right choice tactically, the necessary choice strategically, but still a choice that created another orphan, another child who'd grow up with the burden of loss. Who'd wonder if things could have been different? Who'd carry that question forever? Just like Kira carried the question about her parents. About whether they'd still be alive if she'd just asked for medicine instead of lying. If she'd been honest instead of trying to be strong. The burden compounding. Generation to generation. Choice to choice. Shot to shot. Lockhart found her at the airstrip the next morning. Kira was sitting on a concrete barrier, her rifle case beside her, waiting for transport back to Virginia. Back to civilization. Back to a life she wasn't sure she could live anymore. He approached slowly, respectful of space, sat down a few feet away. Hell of a shot, he said. Saved my life, saved my team. Kira said nothing. I know it doesn't feel that way right now. I know you're carrying what you did, who she was, all of it. She had a daughter. I know. I saw the photograph in the intelligence report. That makes it better that she was supposedly a bad person. Lockhart was quiet for a long moment, watching helicopters take off and land. The constant rhythm of a forward operating base. Life continuing despite everything. No, he said finally, it doesn't make it better. It just makes it necessary. She would have killed me, would have killed my men, would have gone home to her daughter with blood money and done it again the next time someone paid. You stopped that cycle. By starting a different one. That little girl is an orphan now, like me. Like probably half the people in this war. How many orphans before it's enough? Lockhart didn't have an answer. Nobody did. That was the truth of it. The cycle just continued. Violence begetting violence. Choices creating consequences, creating more choices. He stood, pulled something from his pocket, his Navy SEAL ball cap, removed it, and then standing at attention in the Afghan dust, Commander Garrett Lockhart saluted Kira Dalton. Not as superior to subordinate, not as officer to contractor, but as one warrior to another, as acknowledgement of sacrifice, of capability, of the burden carried in service of others. The salute held. Perfect. Formal. Laden with meaning. Kira looked at him. At this man whose life she'd saved. Whose children still had a father because she'd pulled a trigger. Who was offering the highest form of respect his profession knew. And she didn't salute back. Instead, she stood, looked him in the eye, spoke quietly but firmly. Sir, with respect, I can't accept that. Lockhart lowered his hand, confused. Why not? Because I didn't do it for honor. I didn't do it for glory or recognition or whatever that salute represents. I did it because someone had to. Because if I didn't, you'd die. That's not heroism. That's just arithmetic. One life versus another. I chose, that's all. You chose right. Did I, Volkov's daughter, might disagree. My parents might disagree about the choices I've made since they died. There's no right in this. There's just necessary, and necessary doesn't deserve a salute. Lockhart studied her face, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. You're wrong about one thing. It does deserve respect. Maybe not a salute, but respect. Because you made the hard choice, the one most people couldn't make. The one I'm grateful you made, even if you're not. He extended his hand, not a salute, just a handshake. Equals, professionals, human beings trying to navigate an inhuman situation. Kira took his hand, shook it once, firm, final. Thank you, Lockhart said, for what it's worth, from me, from my kids, from everyone who didn't die today because you were watching. Thank you. Then he walked away. Left Kira standing alone at the airstrip with her rifle and her burden and the knowledge that gratitude didn't make the load lighter. It just made it more complicated. That night, Kira wrote 3 letters. Pen on paper, old-fashioned, permanent. The first was to Lockhart. Commander, mission complete. Find someone better. I've reached my limit. This burden is too much. I thought I could carry it. I was wrong. Thank you for your trust. I'm sorry I can't continue. KD. The second was to Brennan. Russell, thank you for showing me I could belong somewhere. Even if I choose not to stay. You're a good man, better than this war deserves. Take care of yourself. Don't let it break you the way it's breaking me. Kira, the third was to Maxwell. Thorne, tell my father I did what he asked. I became the shepherd. I kept wolves away. But I've become something else in the process. Something I don't recognize. Something I don't want to be. I'm done. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I can't kill anymore. Not even when it's necessary. Especially not when it's necessary. The price is too high. K. She sealed the letters, left them on her bunk, then she packed. Not much. Clothes, her father's notebook, the photograph of her parents. The rifle stayed behind, in its case, on the bed, where someone would find it, where it could do good in hands that weren't shaking, in hands that didn't see faces every time they closed around the trigger. Taped to the case was a photograph, the intelligent still of Natalia Volkov, and beside it, printed from the mission footage, an image of her daughter's photograph, the one that had fluttered down the mountain. Beneath both photographs, a note. One shot, one life saved, one life taken. I can't carry both anymore. Someone else's turn. Whisper. At midnight, Kira Dalton walked through the gates of Forward Operating Base Nightingale. No one stopped her. No one asked where she was going. In the chaos of a war zone, one civilian contractor, disappearing, barely registered. She walked into the Afghan darkness, into the mountains, into the spaces between military presence and Taliban territory where nothing official existed and everything dangerous thrived. She walked like she'd walked into the Montana wilderness 26 years ago, running from guilt, from pain, from the person she'd become. But this time she knew. You can't outrun burden. It follows. It finds you. It waits for you to stop moving, and then it settles on your shoulders heavier than before. Still she walked, because movement was easier than stillness, because disappearing was easier than facing what she'd done, because Kira Dalton, who they'd called Whisper, who'd made the impossible shot, who'd saved lives and taken lives and carried the toll of all of it, had finally reached her breaking point. 18 months later, the forest outside Whitefish, Montana was green with summer growth. A small wilderness school operated on 20 acres of donated land, teaching at-risk youth survival skills, fire building, shelter construction, plant identification, first aid, not shooting, never shooting. Those skills stayed buried. Kira Dalton taught a group of teenagers how to purify water, how to read weather, how to move through forest without leaving trace. Skills her father had taught her, skills that saved lives instead of taking them. One of the students, a 14-year-old girl named Sarah with too much anger and not enough hope, asked the question they all eventually asked. Miss Dalton, were you in the military? No. But you know a lot about this stuff. Where'd you learn? My father, he was a veteran. He taught me everything. Did he see combat? Kira paused, considering how much truth to share, how much burden to pass on. Yes, he did. And it changed him, made him quiet, made him careful, made him want to teach people how to live instead of how to fight. Do you regret not serving? Kira looked at the girl, saw herself at that age, angry, lost, looking for meaning in a world that didn't make sense. I served, she said quietly, just not in uniform. And yes, I have regrets, not because I did it, but because of what it cost other people, what it cost me. Sarah frowned. I don't understand. You will, someday, when you have to make choices that don't have good options, only less bad ones. And you'll understand that regretting something and knowing it was necessary can both be true at the same time. After the students left, Kira walked into the forest, deeper than usual, to a place she only visited alone, a small clearing, 3 grave markers, 2 old, her parents, buried here 26 years ago, and 1 new, a simple wooden cross, a name carved into it. Natalia Volkov, mother, forgiven. Kira knelt, placed wildflowers at the base of the cross. She'd tracked down Volkov's daughter through channels she'd rather not think about. Had set up an anonymous fund that sent money monthly. Education, living expenses, everything a child needed to grow up without following her mother's path. It didn't bring Volkov back. Didn't erase what Kira had done. But it was something. A small piece of the burden lifted. A small piece of atonement. She stayed kneeling for a long time, talking to the dead the way she'd talked to her father's memory for 26 years. I did what you asked, Dad. I became the shepherd. I protected the flock, but I couldn't protect myself from what it cost. So I'm doing it differently now. Saving people without killing people. Teaching instead of shooting. It's slower, quieter, but it's all I have left. The forest whispered around her. Wind in the pines. Birds calling. Life continuing despite everything. They called me Whisper because I was silent. Because I disappeared. Because nobody heard me coming. But you taught me that silence isn't strength. It's just how you survive when the burden gets too heavy to carry standing up. She placed her hand on her father's grave marker. Wood weathered by Montana winters, solid, enduring. I'm still carrying it, Dad, every shot, every face, every choice, but I'm carrying it differently now, not alone in the dark, but here, in the light, where maybe eventually it'll feel less like burden and more like memory. Kira stood, walked back toward the school. Behind her, the 3 graves stood silent witness. She'd been a daughter, an orphan, a ghost, a sniper, a killer, a savior. Now she was just Kira, teaching children how to survive, how to live, how to carry their own burdens when the world pressed down. It wasn't glory, wasn't heroic, wasn't the kind of ending stories usually told. But it was enough. Somewhere in Afghanistan, Commander Garrett Lockhart still told the story about the civilian contractor who made an impossible shot, who saved his life, who disappeared without explanation. They still called her Whisper. The legend, the ghost, the woman who never missed. But the truth was quieter, smaller, more human. She'd been a person who carried more than she could bear, who made impossible choices because someone had to, who paid the price in pieces of herself she'd never recover. And when the burden finally became too much, she didn't break completely. She transformed, became something softer, something that healed instead of hurt. The rifle stayed at Forward Operating Base Nightingale, someone else's tool now, someone else's burden. Kira Dalton had put down the gun, picked up different tools, started a different kind of mission. 1 shot, 1 life saved, but this time she was saving her own. And in the quiet of Montana forests, in the laughter of students learning to survive, in the slow process of forgiving herself for choices that couldn't be undone, Kira discovered something her father never told her. The burden doesn't disappear. You don't get stronger at carrying it. You just learn eventually to set it down, to walk away, to choose a different path, and sometimes that's the hardest shot of all.